And now may I ask Amer Bazkan to talk about the lost cities of the Indus Delta and innovative digital heritage trail cataloging and disseminating lost foreshore heritage. Please.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Amer Bazkan, and I am the director of MaritimEA, a pioneering maritime archaeological research organization based in Pakistan. So I'm here to talk to you about the lost cities of the Delta, an innovative digital heritage trail about the historical port cities of the Indus Delta. I'll just see if I can get the slides going forward. Okay, so the area we're talking about is the southern coastal region of Pakistan. So how we got to this particular project is relevant to this inventory and documentation session. So before I get there, I'll just describe the southern coast there, and there's the city of Karachi, and this is the western delta. So a few years ago, as the Maritime Archaeology and Heritage Institute, a predecessor to MaritimEA, we started the inventory of maritime archaeology in Pakistan. This project is also known as IMAP, which was a pilot project undertaken in 2 phases. I'd also like to acknowledge my fellow principal investigator on this project, Hiba Hashmi, who's with us today. The first phase of IMAP consisted of a desktop study to develop a maritime archaeological potential assessment for Pakistan. With the second stage, we introduced additional research methodologies, ground truthing, and the recording of traditional maritime practices and intangible cultural heritage. I should mention, the data from this project also ended up on Arches, as did a couple of the projects that have been mentioned earlier. With the conclusion of that project, we set up MaritimEA. This allowed us to continue this work with a new project called the Pakistan Maritime Heritage Survey. We focused our efforts on developing an underwater cultural heritage database in marine, coastal, and inland environments. So we undertook further ground truthing of UCH sites identified under the IMAP project, worked with local communities to identify additional sites, and focused on detailed 3D site documentation. So we're now working on an exciting next phase of the project to extend the historical research component by introducing additional historical archives and integrating them into a new GIS database. So these efforts are primarily research and heritage management focused. And while we've ground truth more than double the number of UCH sites since IMAP, and this is important foundational work, we're still not reaching out to a broader public. We're not raising sufficient awareness about the maritime heritage of Pakistan to a domestic audience, or indeed other professionals, heritage professionals in the country. Terms such as underwater cultural heritage or maritime archaeology still remain an emerging concept within the domestic heritage community. So this was the rationale for the Lost Cities of the Indus Delta Heritage Trail, developed as part of the Digital Heritage Trails project. This was funded by the Cultural Protection Fund, the British Council, and the Department of Culture, Media, and Sport. The project focused on a few key sites that most effectively illustrated the cultural history of the Indus Delta and were vulnerable to climate change-related impacts. So over millennia, the Indus River has connected the empires of the Delta and its hinterlands to the rest of the ancient world through the Arabian Sea. The Delta's rich maritime heritage is evident in the many historical ports and cities that once flourished within it. Today, these cities lie in ruins, testament to the rise and fall of kingdoms and dynasties long lost to history. Their demise has been due to environmental change. The shifting courses of the river sedimentation along the many creeks of the delta, and more recently, the subsidence of the delta itself with the inland construction of dams and barrages. Historically, at any one point in time, there always existed at least one city that served as a connection point between the river and the sea. So let me show you some images of the delta. So if you're exploring the creeks of the Western Delta, you'll see these islands off the coast. You might, in fact, see some of these ruins. This here is a site called Jam Jaskargot. I don't expect everyone to remember the names. We can do a quiz at the end if you like, but this site is underwater mostly. It does get exposed periodically, especially during the spring tide. It's a fort, as you can tell, but it has a graveyard. There's what is believed to be a mosque and possibly a kiln. For the larger site, you can see that it exists on the banks of a creek. This is one of the many creeks within the delta. I don't know if I have a laser pointer here, but there's a creek in the background. Yeah, got it. Yeah. And this area floods, remains flooded, in fact, most of the time. Another site here is the possibly 5th century site of Ratukot. Again, here shown surrounded by the creeks and the waters of the delta itself, coming right up to the walls of the delta. Sites that are very vulnerable to climate impact. This is Lahiri Bandar, or Junasha Bandar, that was at one stage one of the fourth, it was, I believe, the 4th largest port on the west coast of India. So at its height during the 15th century. So most of this city lies below the creek in the background there. The citadel, the fortress that was built here remains. And this, of course, is Bhambor. So the historical port of Bhambor, possibly Debel, possibly Barbaricon from the 1st century BC. So accompanying this changing environmental landscape, there existed a dynamic political landscape with competitive fiefdoms jostling for access to and control of the river. The delta became a contested space, and this is illustrated by the presence of these ruins of forts and citadels in the delta. These fortifications were built to dominate over the landscape, to demonstrate power and establish control over the extensive areas of the delta. This was not just for protection against coastal piracy, but also for protection from competing clans within the delta itself. Okay, so what were the outcomes of this work? The project had 2 key objectives, the first one being the development of archival quality high-resolution 3D documentation of these sites, creating digital twins that can be used as baselines for future monitoring of impacts due to climate change. The data was shared with the provincial authorities in Sindh and with public and research-based archives. So Open Heritage 3D, the Lost Cities of the Indus Delta website, which I'll talk about shortly, which is part of this project. Sketchfab, in some sense for an easily accessible public interface. And then, of course, importantly, the Sindh, the coastal province of Sindh, the Sindh Culture Department itself, which is responsible for the management of cultural sites in Sindh. Okay, so here's another shot of Lahiri Bandar at a very basic level. I'll hopefully be able to show you just a 3D rendering of the model. This was in fairly high resolution. I'd say very high resolution. While it's a site that's only about 120 meters per side, this generated more than a terabyte of data, took a couple of days to survey. Now, while we were there, and hopefully I can speak to some of the cultural heritage management implications of this sort of documentation, during our survey, we encountered looting activity at the site. We went there twice, and we were able to demonstrate that the activity had occurred recently by overlapping the data from our first survey in February 2024 with a follow-up survey in April the same year. So this change had happened only within that 2-month period. And this proved essential in reporting this looting activity to the authorities. So we were able to overlay the two data sets and identify a variance between the first data set and the second. So for the technology hacks, there's basically a comparison in Cloud Compare between the two object files for these surveys. And what you're seeing is an accretion of information, or an accretion of material in the green and a loss of material in the red. And that reflects these two looting pits that had been dug on the site. You can also see the green sort of trim on the foliage nearby. And that really, over that 2-month period, it does in fact reflect the growth of that foliage over that period. So you can see how effective this can be in identifying change over time. And that's ultimately what this data is being generated for, to establish those baseline data sets. So while we could already demonstrate the research and heritage management benefits of our approach, we still weren't able to communicate this to a broader public. To address this, the second objective of the project, including using the same digital twin data and making it available to a general audience. This involved decimating the high-resolution data, developing a gameplay-based interface, and making it accessible online. The trail is available on mobile platforms. I'd have to click through this. I think it's sort of a scroll through the website. So it's available on mobile platforms as well as in multiple languages, in English, in Urdu, the national language of Pakistan, and importantly in Sindhi, the local regional language of the Delta. Oral histories and folklore from local community elders were combined with interviews from historians and archaeologists and embedded into these digital heritage trail experiences. So now with the website was also accompanied by a public engagement and outreach initiative to engage with local communities and school networks within the Indus Delta. This was essential for taking the digital heritage experience to regions where the digital divide would otherwise limit access to such experiences. And so this is really going and working with local communities and the local schools within the Delta region. So you can see some of the outcomes here of the project. Now, with the generous support of the Cultural Protection Fund, the next phase of the project will seek to engage with a local museum called the Magnificence Center. This is the largest science museum in the country, and to develop an interactive display about the lost cities of the Indus Delta and incorporate it into a climate change themed exhibition later this year. We will also seek to extend the schools program, doubling hopefully its outreach. We also plan to develop tour guide training to support local fisherfolk to run tours to the lost cities. The training will focus on sustainable tourism practices to limit impact on these sites, raise awareness about the impact of climate change, and promote responsible interaction with the surface remains at these locations. So, and finally, we will be creating a short video to illustrate the impact of climate-induced migration, demonstrating how climate change is not just affecting cultural heritage sites, but also the local coastal fisherfolk communities. So inventorying and documentation of UCH is, as I said, foundational work. However, public outreach, interpretation, and engagement is essential to raise awareness of such heritage and to make UCH an active part of the public consciousness. So we couldn't have done this without the support of our donors and partners. Again, the British Council and the Cultural Protection Fund and some of our local partners. While digital heritage enables public engagement with UCH in new and novel ways, the digital divide in many regions of the world often still requires a combination of traditional in-person and digital heritage experiences. I'd like to acknowledge now the team that was involved in putting this together. And here's a quick snapshot of some of their activities in the field. And I'll just close with a QR code to the website. So in our continued efforts to share experiences and learn from each other, I encourage you to visit the website, explore the Lost Cities Heritage Trail for yourselves, and perhaps find it useful for your own projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for the interesting presentation.